So it's my great pleasure to invite Dr. Deborah Haarsma to come and speak to us on Do You See What I See? Deborah, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a wonderful privilege to be here in Scotland. So a big thanks to Ian Morris and everyone here at Grasping the Nettle for bringing me over. So I am an astronomer. So as proof, there I am at a telescope that I used for many years. So I did my graduate work at MIT in Boston, and my thesis was on studying galaxies and galaxy clusters. In my work, I got to study some of the largest things in the universe, the most massive objects, and the curvature of space and the expansion rate of the entire universe. It was wonderful. So this is not an ordinary telescope that you look through with your eye. This is a radio telescope. Those antennas detect radio waves from space, and the radio waves that you're used to here in a city are emitted by a tower in the center of the city, and they come to a device like in your car and are converted into sound. Well, here radio waves come from distant galaxies, travel across the universe, and they're converted into images, and we get to see what those galaxies look like. So I studied some of these huge things. But one thing that I had never seen was much closer to home, and that was a total solar eclipse until about 2 years ago. So here's a partial solar eclipse. Has anyone seen a partial solar eclipse? Yeah, I've seen a few of those in your life. So you get to see that bite taken out of the sun as the moon passes in front of it. Now, in August of 2017, I got to go to Oregon in the US. So my family and I, we planned our family vacation around this. We picked a spot in the US along the eclipse path that would be most likely to be clear on that day. And we went to Oregon, and I had seen pictures of total solar eclipses, but they did not do it justice by far. We were so amazed. It looked like this. Seriously, the sky was this deep blue. There was a black circle, a hole in the sky where the moon was, and then you could see the bright shining corona of the sun coming out from it. I can still remember how things cooled down and the smell of the sagebrush there in Oregon as we were looking at this. It was incredible. And everybody had a sense of wonder. Everybody up and down the road that we were standing on were all gasping and screaming. And you cannot ignore things like this. They appeal to all of our senses, and we have this amazing sense of wonder and awe. Now, does science detract from that wonder? Well, no. The scientific explanation actually helped me appreciate this. So if you look on the edge of the black circle, the moon shadow there, you can see little bits of red. That's actually the chromosphere of the sun, little bits of the surface of the sun coming through in addition to the whole corona. Because of my understanding of the sun, it was like, oh, look at that. Do you guys see that? So science increases the wonder. And this is true of all scientists. Now, for us as Christians, that wonder goes a step further. Because for us, it's not just a generic sense of awe. For us, the heavens are declaring the glory of God, and the skies are proclaiming the work of His hands. There is a person behind the universe, and we know that person. It's the same person that we know in Jesus Christ, because in the beginning was the Word, Jesus, and all things were made through Him. This universe didn't arise out of an impersonal force or just out of nothing, but there is a person behind it. So for me, a scientific explanation does not replace God. Yeah, I understand the science of the eclipse, but I also understand God as the creator of it and can worship Him more deeply because of it. For a Christian, this can all come together in this beautiful whole in which our faith enhances our appreciation of science, and the science enhances and deepens our faith as we come to understand God better. But of course, not everyone would see it the same way. So do you see what I see? Well, not everybody does. Jerry Coyne doesn't. He says, I don't think one can be really smart and religious at the same time. Oh, thanks, Jerry. It's really nice. So he says, well, many public intellectuals, accomplished scientists are atheists. And it's at the very least irrational if they believe in God. this is an example of the militant atheists. We've already referred to them this evening, and Richard Dawkins and the like. And they keep putting out this message that smart people just don't believe in God. But he's wrong. This data show that. I'm going to show you several examples here of how a lot of scientists are open to spirituality at some level, and many are adherents of the world's major religions. So here's Nancy Abrams. So she's open to the idea of God, although a different sort of idea of God than the one I have. She says, well, all the old views of gods are demonstrably inadequate. God is an emergent phenomena that can have emerged only from humanity. Oh, well, that's an interesting idea, but it is open to it. She sees God as sort of a social construct that benefits society, but not an absolute truth, and certainly not a person out there. So she doesn't see what I see. Do you see what I see? Well, Stephen Jay Gould sees something kind of like what I see. It's a little closer. Science and religion each represent different areas of inquiry. Science is the domain of fact, religion is the domain of values, and the two domains do not overlap. So this has some truth to it in that there are a lot of scientific questions, like the exact nature of the corona of the sun, that the Bible just doesn't address. And similarly, there's a lot of biblical themes that science just can't address. But it's missing something here. It's missing, well, for one, there's a lot of other ways of knowing than science. There's the arts and humanities and history that we should be taking into account. And for him, it's like each topic either lands in one area or the other. And he's saying that religion is only about values, not about absolute truth claims. And religious people know, like us, know that it is about absolute truth claims. And it has this effect of cutting up the pie in different ways. So everything is either in the science part of the pie or in the religion part of the pie. And you know which part of the pie is getting bigger? The science part's getting bigger over time. And so religion is getting smaller and smaller in this model. So here's someone who sees things a lot closer to me, and that's Aleister Mcgrath. I so respect his work, and I think he's been here to speak. He sees the relationship of religion and science in that religion is a mental framework that we bring toward the natural sciences. It gives us a lens, a framework that helps us make sense of the whole of our life. So not just science, but our own experience, human culture, moral choices. All of these things come together in our understanding when we view them through a Christian worldview. And there are many scientists who are Christians, leading scientists. Here's an example of several of them. 4 of those 6 are on the board of BioLogos, so I know them quite well. I know all of them well, actually, as friends. And I can tell you how deep and personal and real their faith is. These people pray. A couple of them preach regularly in their churches. They do not set aside their faith to do science. And their faith is lived out throughout the week. And they're open about their faith, and they talk about it on university campuses, talks in the public square. These are wonderful role models for the next generation of what it looks like to be a believing scientist. Now, Francis Collins is the current director of the National Institutes of Health, and he is the founder of BioLogos. I said a few brief words about BioLogos earlier. And he founded that after writing his book, The Language of God. And in that book, he told his story of coming to faith. And that book is still impacting people today. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. It was on the cover of Time magazine. It had a level of profile that a lot of the other science and faith books just hadn't been able to achieve. And so it has had a tremendous impact. All right. So when I, as an astronomer, look at the Andromeda Galaxy, what do I see? Oh, I see one of the beautiful things in God's creation. Isn't it stunning? Oh, I just love Andromeda. So this is one of my favorite galaxies. I actually have a lot of favorite galaxies. So this one is a spiral galaxy, and it is a twin to the Milky Way. So it's a similar size. It's our next door neighbor. And you can see that it's a flat disk kind of edge on, tilted a bit towards us. And you can see the spiral arms. There are these dark lanes of shadow there, and those dark lanes are areas where there's clouds of gas and dust that are blocking some of the light. You can also see that lovely blue color, And the blue color is from new formed stars. You can think of it as baby blue if you like. So when a population of new stars form, it gives off a bluish color, and that colors this whole galaxy. And there's even some small galaxies in orbit around the big one. So I love galaxies like this. Now, I'm not the only one who has favorites. There are other scientists who just love what they do. So you'll hear sometimes that, oh, well, science just takes all the fun out of things. It's all cut and dried, and there's no more wonder left. Well, they haven't met some actual scientists. Because when you talk to scientists, you ask them about their work, and they will tell you how cool it is and how amazing. I know a biologist who has their favorite protein. And I know a paleontologist who has her favorite bone in the body. It's the pelvis, because from it you can study how creatures walk, and she just loves pelvis. I know a physics professor who makes his students cheer every time he introduces a new fundamental law of nature. So he has his students cheering out loud like, hey, second law of thermodynamics, yay, we know a new fundamental law of nature. That physicist happens to be my husband, so we're also physicists. All right. So, different people see different things. But what does Genesis see when it looks out at the natural world? And here's where the rub comes for a lot of people, where the rub came for me personally. I grew up in a Christian home, wonderful Christian family, great church. I learned so much about God, his love for me, and how to live for him. But our whole church growing up believed that the universe was young. The earth was young. It was created in 6 days. We had not heard of any other Christian position. All the other views were so clouded and framed in atheism that we just didn't see them as possibilities. Now, when I got to graduate school and started digging into the evidence for myself, I learned that a galaxy like this is billions of years old, far older than the 6 days of Genesis. So I wondered, what do I do with that? And I want to tell you how I worked that out. Partly so that you can see how can I, as a Christian and a scientist, take Genesis seriously. Because everybody reads, you open the Bible and it's the first thing you read, 6 days. How do I take that scripture seriously? Well, here I am grateful to several Old Testament scholars that I have learned from. And I learned from them about the culture surrounding the ancient Israelites. If you remember, the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for hundreds of years. They also lived near Babylon. And those cultures viewed the world around them as having many gods, being populated by the sky goddess there. You can see her body arching over the whole earth in this solid dome of a sky. You can see the earth god laying flat at the bottom. They believed the earth was flat and there was a solid dome sky. You can see the air god holding up the sky. You can see the sun god riding in a boat from one end of the sky to the other. This was the Egyptian picture of the world. So for the Hebrews who knew about that picture, when they first heard Genesis 1, for them, the amazing thing was it didn't have all these gods in it. It had the same physical picture, same solid dome firmament, flat earth, the waters above, the waters below. And you have that picture right there in day 2 of creation. And I tell you, when I was growing up, I had no idea what was going on in day 2. Like, what is this firmament? What are the waters above? I don't get it. It made so much more sense when I learned that all the ancient people thought that. Now, like every 10-year-old today knows about the water cycle. Water evaporates, it condenses in clouds, it precipitates. They know all about that. The ancient peoples didn't have that picture. They pictured the sky as a solid dome and the rain coming through that dome. And of course, that means there's an ocean of water up there. They also knew some about clouds and so forth, but this was a common picture they had in their minds. So here's the interesting thing. God didn't try to correct their mistaken science. When God was inspiring and revealing Genesis 1, he didn't say, okay, now you've got that wrong about the solid dome. Let me tell you about a gaseous atmosphere and the water cycle and all that. God didn't do that. Instead, he put it in terms they would understand so that they could get the main point, that there is one God who is sovereign over everything and not all of these other gods. So for me, that helps me make sense of Genesis 1, to understand better what God's intent was for the original audience and then what its message for me today would be the same thing, that God is not there trying to teach me about the structures of the universe, the timing, but about himself, about how God relates to his creation, that creation is good. Those are the enduring messages of Genesis 1. And that's how I put it together. Now, not all Christians have the same interpretation of this passage. Christians disagree all the time about that sort of thing, but that's how I have found it to come together. Okay, so with that in hand, let's take a look and see what the Big Bang might look like. We already saw that in the movie clip earlier, but we'll talk about it a bit more here. So the Andromeda Galaxy is not the only galaxy in the universe. This galaxy has a few 100 billion stars, so does the Milky Way galaxy. But there are many, many galaxies, in fact, hundreds of billions of galaxies. And they are moving with respect to each other. They're moving apart from each other, and they're doing it in a specific way, in a speed that's proportional to their separation. So it looks like this. Let's see. Here we go. There they go. There are the galaxies moving apart. So that expansion of the universe has been known since the time of Edwin Hubble. On my animation, I had them expanding at a constant rate. But what we learned in the 90s was that that expansion is actually speeding up. So instead of the galaxies just moving apart like this, like I'm showing with my hands, they actually are getting faster and faster and faster over time. This won the Nobel Prize in 2011. Some great scientists on this. The guy on the right, Adam Rees, he and I were in graduate school at the same time. And in fact, we were working on the same project. And then I went off to do one project, and he went off to do this. I was that close. Oh. So my Nobel dream has faded, but I was that close. All right, so if the galaxies are all moving apart, then we can rewind in our minds back to the beginning of what they must have looked like when they were closer together. So all of the material must have been more compact. As we saw, I think in this video, that it was all compressed into a tiny dot. So it was incredibly densely packed and incredibly hot. And this original hot, dense state we call the Big Bang. Actually, astronomers talk about the Big Bang as everything just after the first instant and then the way it expanded and cooled over time. So the heat from this is still giving off radiation today. It was detected by this telescope in New Jersey in the 1960s, another Nobel Prize-winning discovery. This telescope detected radiation coming from all over the sky. That was the remnants of the original Big Bang, and that radiation is still reaching us today. If you were to plot it out, it looks something like this. So it's hard to draw stuff that appears over the whole sky. So what you have to do is imagine you're standing in the middle of this marble and looking outward. And then this would tell you the blues and greens and reds are showing the intensity of that leftover heat radiation from the beginning of the universe. This is such a cool image that when it came out, my husband found earrings with that picture on it. And that's the earrings I'm wearing. So I got these for Valentine's one year. This is geek love. Okay, right. He's a physicist, so. All right. So this tells us a lot. It tells us the age of the universe, 13.8 plus or minus 0.04 billion years ago that this Big Bang happened. And I have to say that the Big Bang is a scientific model. That's how astronomers talk about it. But in the larger culture, the phrase has come to be associated with an atheistic worldview, that the Big Bang somehow replaces God, that it could explain our existence instead of divine intervention. But in a Christian worldview, the Big Bang is a scientific description of God's creative work, just like photosynthesis is a description of what God is doing in the leaves and cells of plants, or gravity is our description of what God is doing to hold the planets in orbit around the sun. That's how we can bring this all together in a Christian worldview instead of two separate pieces of the pie. A scientific explanation does not replace God. It's amazing how often that phrase is violated. You have atheists who say, well, you know, we have a scientific explanation, we don't need God anymore. I also hear Christians using it the other way. They'll say, oh, such and such doesn't have a scientific explanation, therefore that's where God is. And yes, God is there in those parts science can't explain, but he's also in the parts that science does understand. And remembering that God is in all of those parts is so important for a good Christian perspective on the natural world. Okay, now back to the science, one more piece, and then we're going to get to the multiverse. So this universe that I've been describing turns out to be fine-tuned for life. It has been carefully crafted such that life would be able to arise. So when I say life, I'm talking about really simple life. And what I got there is a picture of bacteria, single-celled creatures. That's what I'm thinking of for simple life. So even for a simple life, the universe needs to do a few things in order for this to work. One is simple life needs a stable energy source. Like our sun. Our sun is a wonderful, stable energy source. And we need long-lived stars to provide that source. Simple life also needs a variety of atoms. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, these are what make up our bodies, plus a nice sprinkling of some other things. It's pretty hard to imagine any life arising that is just made up of hydrogen. We need some variety of atoms, otherwise it's not going to work. Now, where do you get those kinds of atoms? From long-lived stars. Long-lived, as stars form, they're a cloud of gas and dust coalesces and forms into a star. And then in the interior of that star, fusion reactions happen in which hydrogen is converted into helium, helium into carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. All of those elements are made in the interiors of stars. And at the end of the star's life, the star explodes or expands outward. That material disperses out into the galaxy and then is gathered into the next generation of stars, which now has more elements in it, eventually leading to the planets and life forms that we have. So, even simple life like bacteria, you need long-lived stars. Now here's the other thing you need for long-lived stars. You need the strength of gravity to be just right. If gravity is too strong, then this process of forming a star, well, it would happen really quickly. The material would just all pull in rapidly from gravity, and you'd get a whopping big star. It'd be very hot in the center, and all of those fusion reactions would happen very quickly, and it'd be a flash in the pan, and this star would be burnt up. So that's if you have too much gravity. If you have too little gravity, well, the gases try to gather, but they don't quite make it, and so you never actually get them coming together enough to form a star. So you need the strength of gravity to be just right. That is one of several physical parameters that we know in our universe that are set to these just right values. If they were a little bit higher or a little bit lower, we would have weird conditions where stars wouldn't form, or you wouldn't have the elements, or various things, and so that life couldn't survive. Instead, we have this set of beautiful, finely tuned parameters that allows the Earth to be here and allows it to be a good and fitting home for life like us. The universe is fine-tuned for life. Now, Steven Weinberg, Nobel laureate in physics, he agrees, this is consensus among astronomers, that our universe is fine-tuned. Life as we know it would be impossible if any one of several different physical quantities had slightly different values. Okay, so this is not some weird Christian idea or something. This is consensus. Now, that has some obvious implications. And if you're a religious person, if you're a Christian, you're thinking, God set up these parameters with the intention of creating life. Okay, but we need one more piece here to really understand what's going on. And that is the multiverse and what different people see in that. So, are you ready for one more scientific idea here at the end of the evening? One more amazing thing about the universe? Yes? Front table, we're ready? Yes. Okay, great. My front table here has been helping me stay awake with the jet lag, and they're awesome. All right. Okay, the multiverse. The multiverse idea is actually has arisen in several different areas of physics and astronomy. And it has arisen, and I do want to be clear about this, not merely as an atheistic idea to get rid of fine-tuning. Sometimes it is presented that way, as if the atheist scientists were just sitting around looking for a way to explain fine-tuning. That was not their motivation. And it's actually scientists of multiple worldviews and religions who have contributed to these theories. The understanding of, I'm going to focus here on the inflationary multiverse, but it is true of these other ones as well. Oh, okay, sorry, that's the next thing to know. I put 4 different kinds of multiverses up there because they're multiple multiverse theories. And now, to a scientist, what that means, when you hear that there's multiple theories for something, it means we don't know, okay? It means there's multiple explanations, they're all competing, they all have some virtues, some detriments, we don't know for sure. So we don't know yet. And it also means that these models can't simply be merged together. Some people try, kinda, but they're really quite different from each other. If you're interested in reading more about the physics of these are 2 good books that are give a pretty good straight-up explanation of the science without too much of the atheism of their writers incorporated into it. Okay, so the inflationary multiverse, I'm going to explain that to you. The inflationary multiverse says, okay, we're going to go back to the dawn of time. You see the big question mark there? We really don't know how it got started. We don't know yet. We don't have a scientific explanation for that first instant. But we do know that a tiny fraction of a second afterwards, there was that, let's see, can I point like this? Can you see my cursor? Oh yeah, kind of, All right, so this bit here, no, that doesn't work very well. That bit, so that's a tiny fraction of a second after the dawn of time, and it's a very hot and dense plasma of weird particles. Then 380,000 years later, you get that green and blue blobby thing, and that is the heat radiation from the initial explosion. That's when it started traveling to us. And then 13.7 or 0.8 billion years later, we have the universe we see today. So there's that word there called inflation. Now this is a wacky idea, and I tell you, astronomers would not have thought this up if it wouldn't help. Okay, so there's some odd things about the universe, some things that our current standard Big Bang model could not explain. So the inflationary universe was developed to explain some of these things. And the explanation is that the universe expands by a factor of 10 to the 26th in about 10 to the minus 33 seconds. Okay, so for the scientists in the crowd, there's a few of you who know scientific notation. You're going, what? And the rest of you are like, huh? Okay, so expanding by a factor of 10 to the 26 means that it doesn't just get twice as big or 10 times as big. It means it gets 10 with 26 zeros behind it times as big. So 10 bazillion gazillion times as big. And then 10 to the minus 33 seconds means it happens, well, 10 to the minus 1 second would be 0.1, 10 to the minus 2 would be 0.01, 10 to the minus 33 is 0.001 seconds. So an incredibly short amount of time, the universe expands by an incredibly large amount. It's bizarre. Okay, so we don't come up with these things just for the fun of it. They came up with this because there's actually some physics behind it that could explain it, and it explains some features of the universe that we currently knew. Now, the thing about it is that this model also predicts a multiverse. It predicts that there are going to be multiple universes. So do you see the multiple universes? This is an artist's sketch. Do you see the different bubbles? They represent different universes. And do you see the Earth in the one there? So that's our bubble in the foreground, not to scale. Okay, that's a big planet in there. But each of those bubbles represents an entirely separate universe. And you can see some of them don't look so friendly. They're filled with squiggly lines and zappy things. And some of them would not be very friendly, because this model also predicts that each of these universes has somewhat different physical parameters, some of which are hospitable to life, some of which aren't. Each with different parameters. This model is still, the inflationary theory has been confirmed for this universe. But the idea of the multiverse is still very speculative. George Ellis wrote, the multiverse proponents are proposing weakening the very nature of scientific proof because we can't go and actually measure the other universes because there are other universes. We can't get there. So how would we ever confirm this theory? Can't do that. Max Tegmark says, well, does every prediction of a theory need to be confirmed, detestable, in order to confirm the theory? So there's debate among scientists about this. I guess what I want you to take away, though, is that the multiverse, some people argue, well, this explains fine-tuning so that we don't need a God to set all of the parameters of the universe just right. I'm going to go back to that slide so you can see it. Sorry, I just want to go back to here. These fine-tuned parameters, like the strength of gravity there, it sure, from a Christian perspective, it feels like God set that just right. And then the atheists say, well, if you've got a gazillion bubble universes and some of them have parameters set different than others, well, then there's bound to be one of them that's just right for Earth. It's not so surprising. Don't need a God for that, they will say. But, sorry to flash through these, but that turns out that Mother Universe still would need to be fine-tuned. And it still would require a beginning. So, however our universe arose, there are theories that have been worked out that there should be some beginning to the precursor to our universe. So we're still talking about something that is fine-tuned and has a beginning. And even with a multiverse, we don't have an answer to the question of why is there something rather than nothing? Did this all just arise on its own, or was there some supernatural being, person, force that gave rise to it? And why does math describe the universe so well? This one always gets me, because math just works so well in the universe, the incredible precision of what we see going on. So all of those things together remind me that a scientific explanation, even of the multiverse as an origin of our universe, would not replace God. Big punchline, universe or multiverse, I believe God is the creator. One closing thought for you. One final piece of wonder. I promised a tour of the universe, so we've toured all the way from an eclipse in Oregon out to entirely separate universes. So let's come back to our own universe a bit, and the moon. So here's an image of the night sky. There's a bunch of stars there, and the moon, and then there's that box, and the box is shown to scale. So we're going to look at a little piece of the sky. So it's like if you held up your pinky at arm's length, and the size of your fingernail there, we're talking about a patch of sky smaller than that. All right, little patch of sky. And the Hubble Space Telescope looked at that patch of sky and took many, many images over several weeks and added them all together to make the most sensitive image ever made. And you find that that black piece of sky, it looks like it's empty. It looks like there's nothing there. And it turns out it looks like this. It's not empty at all. It is filled with hundreds and thousands of galaxies. Each of those blobs is a galaxy comparable to the Milky Way with hundreds of billions of stars in it. That little patch of sky is filled with so much abundant extravagance in this universe of billions upon billions of galaxies. So when you're out at night, picture that little spot of sky with thousands of galaxies in it, and then picture every piece of sky that you see being filled like that. This is the wallpaper of the universe. For me as a Christian, it just fills me with amazement and at the beauty of it and the abundance of it. But not everybody sees it the way I see it. Carl Sagan would look at this. Carl Sagan was an American astronomer, great scientist and educator, but he was also an atheist. And he looked at this vast universe and said, we find that we live on an insignificant planet of a humdrum star, lost in a galaxy tucked away in some forgotten corner of the universe. Oh, how depressing. Insignificant, forgotten? Actually, forgotten by who is a question. So, highlighting this very meaningless picture. But this is not a new question. It actually goes back to the Hebrew Scriptures. God does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, there it is, that vast reach of space. Okay, so the ancients didn't know how truly huge the universe was, but they were picturing as high as the heavens are above the earth. And then you might think, well, the next line's going to be, so puny are humans. You know, we're really small compared to the whole universe. But instead it says, so great is God's love for those who fear him. That's the message that God wants us to get from the incredible vastness of the universe, that his love is that vast. And then it goes on, as far as the east is from the west, that's as far as one end of the universe from the other, as far as you can go in either direction. So far has God removed our transgressions from us. God is inviting us to picture our sins removed to the ends of the universe. That's how incredible God's forgiveness and love is. So, for me as an astronomer and a Christian, when I look out at space and I see this amazing universe, and then I bring alongside it this teaching from Scripture, I'm just overwhelmed every time that God's love could be that vast and that personal, that the God of this whole vast universe came to earth to walk among us, to live our lives, know what a human life is like, and to give his life for us, for me, despite my sin, to save me from my sin. That is the same God who made this universe and is the lover of my soul. And I'm overwhelmed every time. The only proper response is worship. Thank you very much.